Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cannabis 45 podcast with Jon and George. We're so happy today to have our guests and our friends from Boveda. GrowHaus, we're built around a belief that our customers should be using products, inputs, and equipment to their facilities that are the best in terms of supporting facts, evidence, science, and reasons why we recommend suppliers we work with and the products these guys use, and making what some thought would be a difficult decision really easy decisions. I've seen it happen 200 times across the LPs that we work with on a regular basis across the country, and I see it time and time again. So our approach really works from our foundation of what we're trying to build. And our approach is to educate and inform first. And we're lucky and honored to be partnered with the guys at Boveda. It's a privilege for us to be able to tell their story, talk about these guys, explain all the benefits and science behind their products and the benefits to the preservation of cannabis and terpenes, yields, profitability for LPs, so much. We're really honored to be able to relate that story to our customer base. But today, we don't have to do that because we got the guys with us today. So we're really excited to get started, and thanks again for your guys' time today.
Thank you, Jon. Appreciate the intro. That was super nice. We've got Drew and Brian on our side with us today.
And that's Scott.
And I'm Scott. We Drew and I both work on the sales side of things, and Brian is our director of R&D. He's a smart guy here today.
Uh-oh. That's why we asked him to be on this, to be honest. So.
Drew and I are just a couple dumb sales guys, and Brian's the brains.
We learned that. We learned that 1 year ago today, right, guys? 1 year ago, we were down in Minneapolis at your facility, and we learned a lot. And,
Happy anniversary.
Also to you.
Let's make
that was a great trip. We were just talking about that beforehand, how fun that was having you guys here. Hopefully this COVID stuff goes away so we can actually travel across the border and come see you in person again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we got some stuff to show you when you get up here, so.
Yeah, and just a little bit more about Boveda, patented technology that regulates moisture inside of packaging. So it's packet form. It goes into whatever you're packaging in. It's going to add or remove moisture to maintain a specific relative humidity level. In terms of cannabis, what Boveda does is it creates a monolayer of water molecules around the trichome head. And that protects those terpenes from degrading and evaporating out of the cannabis. I think we're going to dive into that a little bit deeper later on, but that's just a little brief snippet of what Boveda does.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Can you guys maybe start for telling our audience how Boveda came to be and when and what markets you started in and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. Boveda is, I believe we're in our 24th year, going on to our 25th year. Boveda started in the tobacco space. So there was a need for a maintenance-free way to properly store your cigars inside of a humidor. And all of the traditional ways that was done, and they're still used sparsely in the industry, is filling up either a sponge, sometimes a shot glass, or these refillable containers. And the problem with those is they only gave off moisture. So you'd fill them up and they'd give off 100% moisture, which is not good. And then they drop down to zero as they dry out. So you have this roller coaster effect. The cigars are always being shocked by moisture. And you have to refill them, and it's a mess. It's messy. It's time consuming. So we developed a product that you basically plug and play. You forget it, and it works for about 4 months inside your humidor, creating a perfect environment. Drew's got a really cool story of how he came to know Boveda that ties perfectly into this too.
Well, anybody that loves cigars knows what it's like trying to keep them in prime condition. And I was in a cigar store buying cigars, and I'd normally buy one or two, and I bought a bunch, and the guy at the store put a Boveda pack in my exit bag, and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "You'll never recharge your humidor again." And for a cigar lover, that's like a epiphany moment where you just go, it's a shocking moment. It's like the hassle of trying to maintain a mechanical humidistat inside of a humidor is brutal. It's the way we used to do things until Boveda came along, and that's the way I discovered Boveda, and fell in love with the technology, and then ended up meeting the people, fell in love with the people, and then I ended up starting to travel with Scotty and taking Boveda to trade shows all over the place. So
yeah, the tobacco industry was booming at the time, and then as years went on, we knew that there's obviously other industries and other products that are moisture sensitive on that micro scale, and one of those was musical instruments. So any wooden instrument, as you know, wood will either absorb or give off moisture depending on the environment, and that can create warping or cracking in the wood, which becomes a big issue for guitars. They lose their tune. If it's really extreme, they'll crack and they're ruined at that point. So we created a product that was specific for wooden instruments and wooden products. And then back in around, I want to say 2007, we had some folks that were using our tobacco RH level packs for cannabis. Now, cannabis was not on our radar. We're, at the time, we're a pretty conservative company, and it just wasn't something that we were, looking to get into per se. Well, as time went on, more and more people started using our technology for cannabis, and they needed something a little bit lower that was specific for the cannabis plant. So we went to work and spent about 3 years developing the 62% formula. We found that 62% is the best RH level for the widest variety of cultivars out there. And here we are today. Like Drew said, I think we did our first trade show in Canada, May of 2016. It was the Lift show. Had no idea what we were getting into, what to expect. It was a pretty big show from what we were generally, doing in the States. And we sold out of our product, or we give away samples at shows. We gave all of our samples out in the first 3 hours. It was insane. People hadn't really heard of us yet. So it was just a lot of education and handing out swag. And
you know who took those samples? The guy that was right next to you in Toronto on the booth next to you. So I apologize, but I thought it was really cool, and that's where I met Drew. And I was curious myself. What is this? What's this Boveda? Right? Everyone called it Boveda, and
still do up here.
That's the first time we met. So
yeah, no, that's the coolest thing I think about our technology is, people use it and experience it firsthand, and they're hooked instantly. It's such a dramatic difference from what people are used to, and yeah, it's.
What's really compelling about your story and evolution is you guys create the market, created the market in the cigar side, created the market in the instrument preservation side, and have created the market in the cannabis preservation side. So we appreciate that because we know what that takes, the education, the science, everything behind it. So maybe a good place to jump in a little more detail would be, why 62%? What's the reasoning behind 62%? What's some of the thought process behind what happens above and below 62% that makes 62% the optimal number for somebody looking to store, package, transport cannabis being optimal?
Yeah, I can jump in here.
Well,
So
let the smart guy hit this one.
Smart guy, here we go.
finally.
Well, it was interesting. The Cannabis Safety Institute performed a study, and they partnered with, I think, several different industry experts, one being the Meter Group, which measures water activity on certain products, especially in the food industry. They took, I think, maybe 9 different cultivars, and they ran them through a wet cycle to a dry cycle back and forth. And at certain RH levels, or certain points within that, they started to document and really look into see when mold growth occurred throughout all these different samples. And during that experiment, that study, it became very apparent at 65% and above is where you do not want to get your cannabis. And that's where the microbial growth happens. Mold, yeast, powdery mildew. As you get even wet, bad things can even happen. So then at that point, we looked at it and said, well, okay, if we know that 65% is that threshold, let's develop something that it'll never, ever exceed and drop it down 3 points. So then the 62 was born.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Can you maybe explain to the listeners? We learned this obviously coming down to see you and talking to you, but how does it work? What's in the packet? How do you regulate it, and how do you get to that 62%?
Yeah, good question. So we use a saturated salt solution. In all of our packs, we use food-grade salts, water, and we use a little bit of gum just to thicken it up. But the beauty of that is the salt water is what really helps and maintain that accurate RH level. So within our product ranges, all the RHs that we have, we blend certain salts at different ratios to water to achieve that RH. So when you combine that two-way technology where the salt can actually absorb the water and or give it off, you combine that with a really unique film that no one else has in the market right now that's extremely porous, if you would, that reacts very quickly to the environment. So when you take our Boveda packs with whatever RH and you put them in a good container, what happens is amazing. Not only can it release water vapor and bring it to equilibrium, but it'll bring all of those, the cannabis or any other product into equilibrium extremely fast and hold it there for a long period of time. Depends on how often the packages get opened, but it's a very, very reactive, active packaging or active two-way humidity control that we have. What's unique about it, and I keep saying two-way humidity control, and when Scott told that story about using sponges or anything else, those are what we call just a one-way, right? So a humectant will always give off water and try to achieve the wettest environment. On the flip side, you can get a desiccant, right? A desiccant's always pulling it in, trying to create dry environment. Those are the one-ways. If you combine both of those together and dial into a certain RH, that's Boveda, two-way humidity control.
And that's what makes it truly unique is there's no other product in the marketplace that has the ability to perform at the level of precision that Boveda performs at. So there are other opportunities in the marketplace. Our encouragement to everybody is to try everything, give us a fair trial, and judge by the results that you get. And I think we'll get into this later, but the bigger picture is the quality that the consumer enjoys is going to be the standard by which brands actually survive in the marketplace. So we want all that blood, sweat, and tears that goes into the production of this wonderful plant to be conveyed to the consumer in such a way where they're going to come back and buy that brand again and again. And we have high confidence that'll happen if people will package and store with Boveda.
Absolutely, it's a trend that's continuing here, and we're happy to be a part of. And a big part of your comment there, Drew, is also having resources like yourself, as well as guys like George and I through GrowHaus, who can help tell your story, educate, relate, be promoted, and make sure people have information to make decisions instead of things they hear or things they read or things they assume. We put the information in front of them and present it properly. These become easy decisions. Second quick comment is shout out to Seavault, a mutual partner that we work with, just referencing Brian's comment about storing with Boveda in a stable container. We do a lot of work with the Seavault guys. Some great studies they have as well with regards to preserving cannabis over a period of time and monitoring changes to the relative humidity. Really interesting stuff there about if you just leave it alone, it just doesn't change. 180 days, 6 months. Time to market for cannabis in Canada is a variable. If you're selling B2B, you're storing and packaging, it's sitting in your place, it's going on a truck, it's going to maybe a provincial depot, it's sitting in a warehouse, maybe ending up at another LP for processing. So by the time your brand actually ends up in somebody's hands, patients or customers, without acknowledging and addressing humidity control concerns, the quality of your product are two different things. So it's really important stuff for people to understand. Yeah,
those Seavaults are awesome. We here in Minnesota, we don't have access to high THC cannabis, so we test quite significantly a lot of hemp, and all of our hemp is stored in Seavaults. It is so airtight, watertight that, Boveda will perform its best, and it is performs better in the best packaging. So yeah, totally agree with you on C-Volts there.
A quick add-on question to pick up where we were talking on the 62%. Obviously, we know that in the cannabis space, there's also a 58% Boveda pack. So maybe you talked about going above 65%, causing microbial growth and mold on the cannabis to degrade the terpenes and cannabinoids. 58% your other product line. My understanding, and educate me some more, as always, that on the 58% side, that's more for product that might be going towards extraction and being used in other forms other than 62% is a better relative humidity for kind of flower, top quality flower that's being sold to smoke as is. Is that a correct interpretation of 58 versus 62 in terms of the two RHs that we can get from Boveda?
Yeah, sort of. So, I mean, the biggest reason that we initially developed a 58 was really a personal preference. We had some folks that thought the 62 was a little bit too high. And one of those areas was folks that like to roll joints. They just thought that the 62 was slightly too sticky to get the grind they wanted, and then for just the joint to keep it burning properly. So we have a lot of joint smokers and pre-roll brands that love our 58% for that reason. But, again, the biggest is just personal preference. If you like it a little bit drier, 58. But 62 is our staple RH in Canada alone. I don't know the exact number at this point, but, last year it was about 90% of our Canadian customers preferred the 62% over 58. It's got to be somewhere near that number this year, too. But I think it's a great segue into, Brian touched on that there's a range, a high limit at 60.65, and so that's great because we don't get the mold. You don't run into those issues. But what happens if you go too dry? So on the flip side of that 0.65, there's also a bottom limit that you don't want to go below, and I think I'll let Brian to touch on it more, but the biggest issue with that is the terpene degradation. So when that happens, when you go below that 0.55 water activity, you start losing terpenes at a much more rapid phase. And we've got some really cool testing that has been done at a third-party lab around terpene degradation. I'd love if Brian would just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, it's once we started to understand, it's a consumer preference, obviously below that 65 and 58, we started to understand that, not only just water is evaporating, something else is happening. And it was actually kind of just voiced from the consumers, right? Customers are coming back and kind of highlighting what was occurring. And there were things that we were hearing that sometimes the terpenes, the smell wasn't there, and sometimes it was, and the texture was there, and then it wasn't there, and so it, from a scientist's perspective, you hear those questions and it piques your curiosity, so you dig into it, right? You want to do some experience and you want to figure out what's going on. And Scott mentioned this, the word monolayer. As we started to test and understand, as you started to take your cannabis from 62% and you dropped it down, we were measuring and understanding how many terpenes were actually in the bud itself, and then also measuring the actual terpene smell in the headspace of the containers. And as we started to get drier down to 55, 53, or 54, it was being evaporated faster. So anything below 55%, terpenes were accelerating at an evaporation rate that was phenomenal. So we went back up into that range of 62 and 55, and we've kind of focused in on that. And what we started to understand was this unique phenomenon of this monolayer of water gets formed around the trichome head. And this is something that was pretty widely known in the coffee industry. So coffee beans, when they get roasted, during shipment over time, if they weren't kept at a certain RH level, the same thing was happening. The aromas of the coffee beans were being evaporated. And once we started to dig into that further, we got in touch with a great professor out of the U of M who researches a lot, really heavy detail. And we both came to the conclusion the same thing is occurring. That monolayer water is happening, and it's preventing evaporation between that range of 62 down to that 55. So, yeah.
So understanding as well that dropping below 55 means that monolayer is evaporating, and the degradation of the cannabinoids and trichomes and ultimately your terpenes happens sub 55.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's at 0.55 or 55% is when that monolayer is at its thickest point. There's not much of a thickness increase, but as you start to drop below that 55, it's getting thinner and thinner. Just think about it as, the barrier around those trichomes is getting thinner. Therefore, it's not protecting as much, right? Yeah. And not only are you watching your, cannabinoids and terpenes evaporate, you're watching water evaporate. So it also gets into that, if I've got a gram of weed and I start dropping it way below 55, now in a package you could see it, way below 1 gram.
Just to cut in really quick too, for people listening, we will share all of these studies and documents, and there's illustrations and some videos as well that further explain some of this. So if you want to do a deeper dive, that will be available to you.
Can you guys maybe tell us a little bit more about the economic impact of keeping it at that, above 55, let's say? I mean, there must be, like you said, you lose your quality, you lose your terpenes, you lose, I guess, your THC, and you lose weight.
Well, and water is weight. Yeah, the commodity of cannabis is sold based on weight. So every gram that you save in the process is money in your pocket if you're a producer or an LP. The amount of money that's saved can be significant. I mean, if you look at our early days in the industry where we would see Boveda packs, our cigar humidity levels, in bags that police officers were standing with their foot on in New York from a semi-trailer that had been shipped from somewhere out west, maybe BC, maybe Washington State or California. But you'd see these drug busts, and there'd be those packs in there, and even the legacy growers, the traditional unregulated growers, knew that they had a significant loss in moisture between source and delivery point. And if you quantify that, they're looking at anywhere from an 8% to, in some circumstances, 18 to 20%. If you've got 454 grams of as a measurement, and you lose 15 or 20% of that, and you multiply that out by the cost per gram in your particular market, especially today as the prices, at least on the state side, the prices in cannabis have been going through the roof during the COVID era. It adds up to a significant amount of money. So one of the things that, not being a scientist like Brian, I'm more of a sales guy. I would tell people, quite frankly, if you give us 50 cents, we'll give you $1 in terms of our performance. That's generally what the economic impact is to packaging with Boveda versus not using us.
For sure. And when we were down seeing you guys and having access to your resources and some of your presentations, and having given your presentation to several groups, understanding that calculation from a yield perspective to dollars is important. And the other thing that we did down there is we listened. So, we have a water activity meter ourselves, and part of your presentation that we're familiar with is the concept of the RH of typical cannabis produced in Canada. And we see it, and you're talking 40, 45, 50 on a steady basis. And what we're learning through you guys is 55 is as low as you want to go, and you want to be ultimately 58 to 62. So when the cannabis that we see from our customers is typically 40 to 50, just as a general, there's some work to do and some more education to get out there in front of these guys, which is what we get up and do every day. So,
John, you're making an important distinction. There's not a lot of selling to do in this process. We're really in the education business because the selling happens by itself. Everything we're talking about is measurable. There's no convincing that needs to be done except for overcoming whatever your own personal bias is. We tell people, don't take our word for it, try it for yourself. We sent out a Boveda challenge. It was a fairly extensive, thousands of Boveda challenge kits went out through social media to a variety of people, from home growers all the way up to commercial enterprises in the cannabis industry. And we said, don't take our word for it. Test it for yourself. Do the pack or the stored with Boveda versus not stored with Boveda, or stored with Boveda versus stored with anything else. And at the end of a period of time, grind it, smell it, smoke it, and tell us what you think. And we had, I mean, this type of it sounds almost unreal when you hear what the results were, but it was a 94 to 96% positive response rate. People saying they preferred cannabis stored with Boveda. That's ridiculously high, and has been really effective for us to say, you know, we don't have to convince you of anything. We don't have to convince you of, you know, we've got some facts to share with you about the food safe nature of our ingredients, the safety of our product, the effectiveness, the endurance of our product, the ability of our product to even bring back to at least a smokable level cannabis that's been over-dried. There's a lot of people, especially in Canada, that have had the unfortunate experience of ordering some really great bud that was great bud when it was at the source, and then they get it at their home and they discover that it's bone dry. And a lot of smoke shops in Canada carry our product now, and people have been buying them through Amazon, another way that people can get our product, and they end up rehydrating their cannabis to a point where it has the tactile experience of a smooth smoke and a friendly smoke on your throat. Those types of things are all measurable. You know, we don't really have to do a lot of selling, but to John's point, we really have a job ahead of us in terms of really educating people on what's actually happening to what's in the cannabis flower from the time it leaves the LP or the producer's location till the time the consumer gets to enjoy it.
There is a crisis of evaporation of weight, which is money, and then the evaporation of terpenes, which is the quality aspect of the cannabis. And John, I love that you got a water activity machine. I think that's why we were so drawn to you and George from the start, was your desire to learn and educate people and really be that full service. I mean, that's what, and it's sad that a lot of these, you know, Canadian LPs really don't know what they're doing. And so we experienced that in a lot of our conversations, that they're looking to us to be the expert, and you've made yourself the expert, and that's great that you can go into an LP's operation, test their water activity, and give them real life data of, you know, maybe where they're missing the mark or where they need to make some improvement. So
and Scott, I want to tack on, and thanks for that, but I want to tack on one more thing to Drew's comment. Evaporation of brand is another byproduct, right? So, you know, straight dollars on yield, straight evaporation of literally moisture, but evaporation of your brand, you don't get that back. There's no humidity control for your brand.
Right.
Exactly. That's what, I mean, we stress that a lot to the LPs that are creating a brand or have a brand. You know, just the lifetime value of a single consumer is pretty, you know, on the cannabis side, is pretty astronomical in my opinion. And the fact that, you know, you get one shot. If a guy walks into, you know, Nova Cannabis in Ontario and buys some product from an LP and it's bone dry, well, there's 30 other brands out there that guy can go and try and experience, and he's never going to go back to whatever that LP is. You got one shot at these consumers.
If I could take an opportunity for a segue, because this might be a great point for it. Drew started going down there. Maybe I can just share a personal story from our side about really how this cannabis came to be scheduled for today, and going through getting into the next topic here. So, you know, it was a 2 or 3 week period, maybe a 4 week period, where I was engaged with 3 large LPs in Canada, having the same conversation with all 3 of them, pretty much one after another. And I had our guys coming to us talking about them hearing or reading online or wherever the source came from that cannabis stored with Boveda was sucking the terpenes out of the cannabis. Now, working close with you guys, knowing the answer, I reverted back to Scott. We kind of talked, and put some materials together as a presentation with an explanation that we can talk about further here. Nothing could be further from the truth. So based on what we've learned to date so far, but also based on the next part of this conversation where I'm going here, in terms of some of the other studies of research you guys have done around, is that true? Why were these guys coming to me asking me these questions? And we could talk about the explanation that was provided as a topic as well. But there seemed to be something out there where people were asking us questions about stuff that just straight up wasn't true based on facts, science, evidence, everything Drew mentioned. And that got Scott and I talking, and that actually ended up us booking today to get together and talk about this. So
let's play it out, because instead of just defending the point, which you've proven to yourself, but our listeners probably haven't had the opportunity, let's just play it out from the perspective of why would somebody even entertain the idea that we're possibly stealing terpenes. Part of it is traditionally people would open a bag of cannabis and they'd take a nose hit off the bag, and they get a big bouquet off the bag and they go, hey, that's some pretty dank bud, and this is pretty good news, and that's awesome. Well, when you properly humidify with Boveda in that bag, what happens is, to Brian's point about the monolayer, instead of those terpenes coming out into the headspace, those terpenes are sequestered in the bud. And what happens is when you take a nose hit off that bag, you don't get as high of a bouquet as you would have if that had all been just unprotected. And so one point that I would make is, when you smell a bag or a jar of cannabis and it's super fragrant, that's really good news to a degree, because that's indicative of what was in that flower, because you're smelling history. The important part is how many of those terpenes and cannabinoids are still in the flower, and what was the opportunity taken to secure those terpenes and those cannabinoids in the flower in the first place. So it's understandable that people would go, hey, this is weird. I don't get quite the bouquet that I get off the bag that I used to without using anything. And to take it another step further, there's a lot of people that have taken shots at getting into this humidity control industry. And they've got some talented people that are very compelling personalities, and they talk a good game, and they say things that aren't necessarily grounded in fact, and they present things about either, how many times have we heard, well, salt is bad. So they had this meme where they were talking about salt is bad, salt is corrosive. And objectively, I suppose if we were dealing with salt on the hood of my automobile, yeah, salt could be corrosive, but the salt in Boveda's product doesn't come out of the pack. The only thing that comes out of the pack is natural water vapor, purified water vapor, and it's one of those arguments that clever salespeople make up in order to get a foot in the door and to get a foothold in the marketplace. And we always try to take the high road, because we owe a great debt of gratitude to anybody that's tried to get into the marketplace, because they have amplified the education about the need for precise, reliable, two-way humidity control in the cannabis industry. So when I see these competitors out in the marketplace, even though their product doesn't perform anything like our product, I actually have a bit of gratitude for them, because they have helped us develop a marketplace that we probably couldn't have done on our own as effectively as we've been able to do, even with some of the disinformation that's out in the marketplace. But we're wide open for all those questions, whether it's about what the Boveda pack gives off, what it takes in, any questions about safety. These are things we take very seriously, and we'll do a great job, if you give us a chance, of showing you specifically what the studies say about what our product does and doesn't do. And we're confident that you're going to be happy using the only product in the marketplace that actually performs the way ours does.
And I love your way you described about the smell and the odor and the bouquet, because one of my favorite lines, kind of after I've helped explain about the process, what Boveda does, why it's beneficial, all the things we've started to cover here, the closing line is essentially, if you can smell your cannabis, it's degrading. And that's not good. So you have to it's a complete paradigm shift in people's minds to associate odor or lack of odor with quality of cannabis. Just science proves it, and it's just the paradigm shift in someone's mind. And that's the industry we're in, and why we get up every morning and talk really highly about what you guys do. So
that's exactly it. We're we're changing the mindset of an industry, that's traditionally for the last 40, however many years, judge the quality of cannabis based off of smell in the bag, and in reality, and I didn't even this is all new for me. We're learning this as we go on our own. Like, that's the part of what I love about Boveda is, we're so interested in learning more and educating ourselves and researching, and that's what we're finding. And now Drew and I on the sales side have the job of telling that story and trying to change an industry in a safer, higher quality way of really judging the quality of cannabis.
Yeah, I gotta add on to that. I remember when that first came in, and Boveda are stealing terpenes. And as a scientist, you're saying, well, how does water vapor do that? And, obviously, if you've got some really sticky, high terpene profile buds in any container, your container's going to smell like weed many, many months afterwards, after it's gone. So we went through the whole gambit of, you know what? I'm going to take our packs. I'm going to test the paper. Nothing's in the paper. I'm going to test the inside of the formula. Nothing was inside the formula. And as we started to dig down, and it was zero terps here, zero terps within the formula, okay, what really is happening? And then it pushed us into those studies to really understand that range and that monolayer. So I'm actually happy. I love talking to consumers and scientists. You have a direct relationship to them and start to understand and solve problems. And it's great. It was really interesting, and just that range alone helps. So.
Yeah, one of the comments that we make that resonates really well is further to Drew's explanation about try it out. Try storing your product with Boveda and without, or with no humidity controls or alternative humidity controls. 30 days, 60 days, whatever you want. Take it out, give it a whiff. Take the product stored with Boveda and grind it up in your hand or put it in a grinder, and it's going to blow your face off in terms of that bouquet, right? So you got to change how they're going to get their receptors to appreciate the quality at the appropriate time, not the fact when you open the bag it smells good. So it's really good examples of helping to explain to people what's happening here and all the benefits.
I was just on a call this morning with an LP, and there was an executive from the LP, and then I don't recall if it was the head grower, but one of the members of their grow team that was very informed on cannabis. And this was brought up by the executive, and I didn't even have to say anything. I don't know if this guy took the challenge. Could I need to follow up with him or what? But he said, no, you don't understand. If you're smelling a lot of terpenes when you open one of our containers, that means that it's not been stored properly, and those are in the headspace. He said, if you use Boveda, you're not going to smell it's not going to be an intense nose hit when you open that bag. But as soon as you break that up and grind it up, it's there, and it's been protected in the cannabis, and now you can actually consume it and enjoy it versus just smelling it in the air.
Yeah, I give people the analogy of, you buy an orange, or if you have an orange, it may smell very, it'll smell like an orange, just a hint of it, but as soon as you peel that open, those terpenes and those oils get released, and then it's like, whoa, your hands will smell like an orange, your mouth, your face, whatever you touch afterwards will smell like an orange.
That's a great example.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to touch on, and around this testing, and we talk about the amount of terpenes that we can save, is we started to understand there's another facet to this, and it was, what happens to cannabis over time when it's stored with Boveda and without Boveda. So more of a stability test. And what was really interesting, we started to look at what would happen in 7 days, what would happen in 30 days, 60, and 90. And these are long-term tests that we're using outside labs, and no one else in the industry is doing these tests. And we've been finding that in almost in the 7 days without humidity control, almost 40% of the terpenes are lost within your cannabis, which is what was astounding to us. And then at the 4-month mark, you lose almost up to 60%. So, and with Boveda, it's just the opposite. We're maintaining it and controlling it all the way through. So there's just more and more studies that we're doing. They're just finding out and just unique plant and terpenes and what happens and how they're actually changing. We see terpenes changing over time and starting to commingle and create their different flavors. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you know what? The 7 days blew my mind too. It's almost like unreal how much are lost at 7 days. And I think, I've heard a lot that people say, oh, I sell my cannabis too fast to need Boveda. Well, 7 days is a pretty short window, and you're losing 40% of those terpenes. I mean, that's all the more reason to make sure that your cannabis is properly stored.
What does it look like after 180 days, right? If you don't have anything in there, because it's the life cycle of cannabis is well beyond 30 days. You're talking 120, 180 days, right?
Yeah, especially up here in Ontario.
John, you brought up this question at a time, and I wanted to go back to it because I think this is it's an easy thing to lose in the conversation. The time to market. What's a short window of time to market in Canada versus what one of the longer time to markets is? I know if I go into a dispensary or if I order through a service, there's a born on date on the package. There's a package date, harvested date, all those details. These are all published. It's all part of the process. This is all measurable. What's the average? What's a short frame and a long frame?
I got to say that, the state of the industry, inventory, brands that are out there, producers that are making different products, it's not inconceivable that a product that might have finished off perfectly fine from the growers and the LP's perspective as it got put into a plastic non-airtight tote with no Boveda or no humidity control process in there. By the time that product ends up in a customer patient shelf, it could be 180 days. So that's why I said in 7 days that happens, in 30 days that happens. Well, what happens in 180 days, 120 days? So call it months, not weeks,
right.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And let me ask you guys a question. So after 7 days, X amount of terpenes get lost without any humidity control. With Boveda, what percent of terpenes get retained under these studies? Have you guys got into that stuff? Or those some of the results that come out? Not to be scientific and nail you down on it, but there must be a number of what you guys are retaining that you can demonstrate through some results that Boveda retains, preserves.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I just wanted to make sure that you guys understand that terpenes, cannabis is an organic plant, right? It wants to, as soon as it's chopped, dried, cured, it's going to start decomposing. It wants to get back to Mother Earth, right? So what Boveda is effective at doing is trying to slow down that degradation, slowing down as much as you possibly can. And at that 7 day mark, if 40%, because of 40% is lost, we're showing less than 10% is lost. And not only that, and when you look at the overall duration, we're looking at almost 8.5 times more, longer, I should say. We can preserve 8.5 times longer terpenes throughout our stabilities test right now. So they're always going to degrade, so you're never always going to be at 100% from day one to the time the consumer gets it, but you're going to retain a lot more versus without humidity control, for sure.
And there's some other factors that come in. We all get all sciencey about it. It really depends on, volumes stored and type of container and type
Conditions.
of packaging and all those things. But the point is there's a window of enjoyment for cannabis flower. And the window of enjoyment without any protection is probably anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. And then it's dramatically different flower. It just is, especially if you're in a dry climate. Canada is blessed with some incredibly dry circumstances. It's very similar to Minnesota in the winter. There's just a lack of humidity. And it's like the market in Colorado. There's just certain places that have such dry climates that it's brutal to try to maintain any type of consistent quality over time. But if you can take the window of enjoyment from a 4-week window and you can extend that into a 4-month, 6-month, 8-month window, that's a dramatic shift in what the consumer gets to enjoy, especially something that's as valuable as cannabis. I mean, this is it's really been gratifying for us, and we've had a wonderful time getting to know and working with the folks in the Canadian market, because there's a certain way about Canadians where they pay attention to facts. They're conscious of the ethic behind the plant. There's an ethic behind the plant. There's a sense of altruism in the cannabis culture in Canada, and in large part everywhere in the world. The plant has a certain ethic behind it, and so that's one of the reasons why we get along with you guys. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're attracted to us, is because we're all pretty much singing out of the same songbook. We're all involved in this industry to be helpful and to give people. One of our mottos is we provide a product that helps people maximize their pleasures and maximize what they love. And well, we're in it for the right reason. We know you guys are in it for the right reason, and I think that's one of the reasons why we get along so well.
Yeah, man, for sure. And it's this is all really great stuff, and exactly what we want our customers and connections and people in this space to learn a lot more about. And having you guys deliver a lot of this messaging from your lips to their ears is absolutely perfect. So it's been really great so far. I don't know if you guys wanted to dive any more into tests that you're doing, or when you guys are ready or comfortable to talk in more detail about that, we'd be ready to listen. Different kind of markets that are applicable for your product outside of, say, LPs is something we'd love to talk about as well. I want you guys to keep kind of going with the flow on the messaging you want to get across here. So, that's...
Yeah, no, I think, the other products out there, anything that's moisture sensitive, I kind of said that in the beginning, can utilize humidity control, and one of the new products out there is edibles, and we've done a lot of testing with edibles over the last couple of years, so I can let Brian dive into those. But everyone's had a cookie that hardens up after a couple days and you can't eat it because it's rock solid, or a gummy that hardens up, and Boveda is here to prolong those windows of enjoyment. Really on the edible side, that's what it is.
Yeah, specifically on the edibles, and this is the curiosity of science, right? And curiosity of, we got some, believe it or not, just gummy bears and different brands, and we've got some Gummy Cbds, our CBD gummies that we got from some of our hemp suppliers, and they didn't have humidity control. And you put one in your mouth, you start chewing it. It's just like chewing an eraser. It's a piece of rubber. And it doesn't have much flavor. And we thought, look, all right, well, obviously there's gelatin in there. There's something that actually is making that gummy a gummy, and it's going to be it's going to be hydroscopic, right? It's going to take in water. So what happens with humidity control? So we started playing around with it, and believe it or not, we got into changing the texture. So now it's actually, once you're actually be able to chew it, the gummies, think about your teeth chew into that thing, and then it starts releasing the flavors. And that's what's most interesting, right? It becomes soft. We're not melting any of the sugars that are coated around it as well. And then we started to play, all right, well, if this is just gummies, what about like vitamins? So it's just one thing leads to the other, and it's amazing. Just walking down a grocery aisle, you look around, and if you start to think, wow, how does that taste? Could it change, or could it be better just by humidity control? Mm-hmm. And then your mind starts opening up of, wow, there's potentials everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about distillate, guys? What about extracts storage?
Those are a little different beasts for sure, because you think about now you're not so much looking at trying to control the humidity on the extracts and distillate once it's in that form. It's almost kind of backing it up and saying, okay, cannabis, before it even gets into that stage, what is the proper humidity that it needs to be at in order for water to be the catalyst to create the distillate or the extracts? We haven't done any deep studies into the actual finished product of a distillate or extract. It's more on that front end of letting water be that catalyst to help increase your yield and maybe some flavors on it.
A great source for details about that would be, you mentioned earlier Seavault, Gary Swanson and John and Ryan down at Seavault. They've come out with an eVault for the storage of distillate post-processing. Gary's really done yeoman's work in researching the quality outcomes for extracted products. So I think that's a great source for you guys, and I know you have a good relationship with him already, and he's more than happy to share that information. And that eVault, which is a medical grade stainless improvement to what they originally did for the Seavault, really has been an incredible success story for them in terms of giving extract producers an opportunity to prolong the life of extract. So it's a subject that we've been really focused on flower. And to Brian's point, we want that flower to be at the highest quality that can be prior to extraction or prior to any kind of consumption. And that's where our focus really is. So I think Gary and Seavault would be a great resource for you on that one.
Yeah, for sure. And I can vouch as well, obviously, working with those guys and understanding the information they have and we have on that for sure. I guess with Brian in the room, and for guys like George and I too, and it's sitting in a Seavault with the distillate sitting in there with a airtight seal and an eVault. Is there any need for humidity control in its, I'll say, raw form before it gets broken down further into vape carts, other products, gummies, edibles? Is there a humidity control effect of processed distillate sitting in a container, eVault or otherwise? Does that evaporate and degrade at the same type of circumstances like cannabis would? I know the answer is probably no, but does it have a chance to degrade if it's not controlled properly humidity-wise?
So, my answer would be yes, there is going to be some opportunity for degradation, and it really depends on the circumstance. So I think anytime you have a perishable product and extract, even though it's more durable than the natural flower, and it's less exposed naturally, it's less exposed to oxidation because of the nature of the product. It's been extracted. It's in an oil form. It's got a lot better ability to weather the storm, if you will. So I think the honest answer is yes, there's opportunity, but the secondary answer would be it's really circumstantial and trying to understand. I mean, if you left it out exposed to air, you're going to have a certain amount of degradation naturally. And if you have it properly packaged, I think that's probably it's an interesting subject for us to be conscious of and to be aware of how we can contribute to that conversation. But I don't think it's a subject area where we pretend to be nearly as fluent as we are in the preservation of flower.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to Drew's point, I mean, it already has some water content in it, and obviously without proper storage containers, just letting it being a slave to the environment, evaporation is going to happen, right? We're all sitting in relative humidity between 35 and 40%. So that's going to continuously just suck water out of everything. So yeah, I could see that. I mean, as you guys were talking about this, I started to think how syrup is made, right? And think of how much water is in maple sap, right? And how long and
these guys know, the Canadians
know right? Kind of getting me hungry now, but I'd have to assume that same process can still be very similar to how extracts and pressing and rosin and all that. So I sit here, I get excited because I want to start studying it, but our main focus is, as Drew had mentioned, is flower. So
yeah, just the amount of volume of distillate in the market, the amount of biomass in the market that will be processed into distillate is, just something to maybe think about, and we'll continue to learn about it and think about it with people that want to learn about it. And it's a big, I guess, available inventory SKU in the Canadian marketplace is distillate, and higher quality product is better for brand, better for profit, better for companies. Lower quality becomes commoditized at lower price points, and maybe there's a way to help differentiate people along the way or help them out, obviously with C-Vault and your guys' input through them. And as we continue to grow and develop as an industry, there's who knows the applications, right?
We certainly want to be involved in the conversation. We're happy to be helpful to people in any way that we can. We don't want to minimize that at all. The extract market's an important part of the Canadian and American and worldwide cannabis industry. But that's one of the shifts that happened in this process. We used to walk into shows and you'd go, oh, this guy does this type of business. They're not really going to be applicable to what we're doing. And what we discovered over time is everybody in the room is part of this cannabis industry overall, and everybody in the room is a potential ally, influencer, partner in the process of bringing down, the stigma, the resistance, the truth, the science, the overall education of the public about what this plant's possibilities are. I mean, we want to be involved in that at every level. So we won't shy away from an extract question, but we also don't want to pretend to be over our skis on it.
And just to reiterate too, some of these studies and things that we've talked about will be available to anyone listening that wants to see it. Specifically, the terpene degradation study is ongoing. So we're just going to keep running that and just watch what happens to cannabis over 6 months, 12 months, all the way up to, I don't know if we have any intention of stopping it at this point. So that will continue to be updated as we learn more about it. But obviously these initial first 180 days are pretty eye-opening to what we're learning. So
yeah. Something interesting is happening up here in Canada right now. The licensed producers and the market is dictating that flower must be above a certain percentage of THC content. They're not really looking at anything else other than you get this much money if it's 20% or higher THC. If it's under 20%, you get half. And it's ludicrous, we all know that, to have a market that's running like that, but that just speaks to the volumes of how important it is to keep your cannabinoids in that trichome, right? If your 21% flower drops to 18, even 19 and a half, you're going to lose half your money, potentially, in the market. It's crazy, but that is the reality.
Well, and it costs just as much to raise cannabis flower that's 24% THC as it does to raise cannabis flower that's 11%. There's not a difference in the amount of resource and inputs that go into that crop. So we could get into a whole other conversation about the impact of wacky regulations. There's a lot of bureaucrats that don't know a lot about the plant that have a lot of input on what the standards are in Canada and what the standards are in the U.S. And that's one subject that would be interesting on a subsequent conversation between us to talk about regulations and standards and things that are coming in the industry. Every industry that matures to a certain point, especially a consumer-driven industry like this one and a health-driven industry like this one, standards become a thing, and you have two choices. You can either be involved in the process of helping discern reasonable standards to maintain quality, safety, all that, or you can wait until some relatively underexposed bureaucrat decides to make rules about how your industry is going to be governed. And, we experience that a lot in the U.S. with the FDA and the different things the FDA has done over the years. You guys have your own journey with that in terms of Health Canada. I got to tell you, it's a lot easier to communicate with and deal with Health Canada than it is to deal with the U.S. FDA. It's but it's something to consider for a subsequent conversation to where will this industry go in the future in terms of quality standards, consumer protections, the way people are educated about terpenes, cannabinoids, therapeutics, all the things that are capable of coming out of this plant. And among other things, you guys are also going there with mushrooms. So that's a whole nother world. I mean, it's just fascinating the amount of progress that's being made in a relatively short period of time. And we're still very much at the beginning of it. I mean, anybody that thinks that we're in a mature cannabis market I think they're fooling themselves. I mean, we're still very much at the beginning, even though you guys have been nationwide for a bit now. It's, it's still a really new industry, and our curiosity and our interest in paying attention and listening and helping in any way we can, that's kind of what drives us.
Yeah, like we said, a new industry that's still new and will be new, and all the more important need of the approach with education and science and facts to support inputs guys should be using, producers should be using. Now, to that end, too, another segue here would be, a couple other market demographics for your product that resonates really well and who we deal with quite a bit of. More and more microcultivators coming online up here in Canada. Health Canada, used to send out their new licenses every Friday. Now I'm seeing it released a couple times a week, and there's always 8 or 9 microcultivator facilities on board. We deal with 25 or so at this point through us. And for us, having the experience, larger scale LPs, a lot of knowledge, education, presentations on the products we recommend, we got a really good offering for microcultivators, and Boveda is part of that offering. So all this information we're talking about is as relevant to the microcultivators because of all the benefits to Boveda and how they can utilize humidity controls to have a better brand, better yield, better presence in the market, faster time to market, better product, quality of flower. So, some of the. Is there any thoughts around the microcultivators with regards to what we've talked about in Boveda? I know the math on what size packs need to be stored with how much cannabis. Do you guys want to get into that sort of stuff for advice to people about how to use the product, how much you need per gram, ounce, pound, kilogram, all the metrics, all the different measurements, right? Like that sort of information is useful. We can transmit that if you guys want to talk about that at all. But how much how you need to buy? At what point do you install the Boveda? Is it after curing? Is it at the very end of curing? Is it in final packaging? Is it in the storage component? When does the Boveda go in, practically speaking?
Yeah, no, that's a great subject to talk about. And the thing with micro cultivators is they don't have the volume that like a large LP does. So they really got to nail the quality part of it. And so it's all the more reason to make sure that your cannabis is properly stored with humidity control. But in terms of sizing, we have a ton of different sizes from a small home grower that's going to have one plant all the way up to, someone that's packaging in 5-pound increments. So on the cultivation side, our 2 most popular SKUs that you would see someone using are 320 gram, which is our largest. That will work for up to 5 pounds. So one of those per 5 pounds. If you have 10 pounds, you add 2. And then our next size down would be our 67 gram. Now, just to clarify, we label the sizes of our packets based off of the weight of them, how much solution is in there. So when we say Boveda 67, that just means there's 67 grams of Boveda solution inside of that packet. Now, that 67 grammer is great for up to a pound or 454 grams. It's our most popular SKU on the cultivation side. If you've got a couple pounds in a bag, throw a couple in there. Same process. You can never over humidify with Boveda. You can never over humidify. So if you have the room, the money, you can add more Boveda packs in there, and it's just going to work faster and last longer. You can never over humidify with Boveda. So I just want to reiterate.
Can you over humidify with Boveda?
I want to reiterate that because we find a lot of times people thinking that if they have too many, it's going to be too much moisture and they're going to run into mold.
It will stay at 62, no matter how many packs you put in.
Correct. Yep.
What about a concept of the 320 gram was 5 pounds? You said, right? That was the ratio there. So let's just take an example of somebody that has a 10-pound capacity vessel to store their cannabis. You recommend 2 320s, or do you recommend X amount of 67s? Is it better to spread out a bunch of 67s, have 2 320s? Is there any tips and tricks for people to learn a little bit more about?
Great question. The thing with the 320 is it allows you to scale at a faster rate than a 67 grammer. So if you have more than like 10 pounds, you're getting up into that 20, 30 pounds. That's really where that 320 makes sense. In my opinion, if you have 5 pounds of product and you're able to, I would buy the 67 grammers and place that throughout the container. There's more surface area. It's going to reach all areas of the cannabis quicker and faster. Now, it's not bad to use a 320. Again, in terms of just you're only throwing 2 in, there's less handling, labor, all of that from a scale standpoint. The 320 makes sense as you get in larger quantities, but I prefer the 67 grammer, and that's what I'm going to recommend if it makes sense every time.
And that just gets to equilibrium faster, guys, or?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay,
There's more surface area exposed. So if you think about it, if you had 5 pounds, you could put one in the top, one in the bottom, either side, in the middle. Boom, it's going to reach all of that cannabis in the bag a lot faster versus having one 320 at the top. The amount of time it's going to have to take to penetrate all that cannabis down to the bottom is prolonged.
Okay. The other side of the coin, though, is there's a trade-off involved, and part of the allure and the attraction for people to the larger configuration is that there's less materials involved.
Correct.
So from an environmental standpoint, in terms of packaging and all that, there's a consistent savings by volume for the larger configuration. So there is a trade-off there, and we want to be frank about that. And to Scott's point, you're definitely going to have a performance enhancement by having more packs spread out throughout a storage container because of the additional surface area. And you may also have a significantly longer duration of the life of the product. It's circumstantial. There's some things that we have to take into consideration in each one of these examples. But I think it's worthy, if you're the first thing is to accept the fact that we have a dramatic problem in the cannabis industry where 90% of the bud getting to the marketplace is too dry. It hasn't been properly packaged or stored. No offense to our friends in the production industry. We don't mean to be a pain in your side. We're just worried about, we're conscious of that consumer that we want to have come back to buy your brand again and again and again. Yeah. And they're potentially getting turned off because they're getting dry bud.
Yeah. Like you said,
and that's real data too. The 90% we did over maybe a year and a half. We went every time we were at a trade show in either a different state or a different part of Canada. We tested samples from the dispensary. Again, you touched on having a water activity machine. This is a handheld device that you grind up cannabis, you put it in a tray, boom, it kicks out a water activity reading in a couple minutes. We have one of those that we travel with. We test the cannabis, we weigh it when we get back to the hotel room, grind it up, and 90% of the product that we bought on the legal market was under that 0.55 ratio.
That's wow.
And that was new technology. If you think about how young this industry is, when we started talking to people about water activity and measuring water activity, that was new technology to the industry. And today, just a few short years later, the conversation has shifted from, yes, we have water activity standards that we're very conscious of, and people are starting to get it. Great news, people are starting to get it. But now there's this whole subject area of terpene degradation and cannabinoid preservation and quality. It's a whole new area that's coming to life in the industry. And ultimately, it's good news. There's going to be some pain along the way for people to accept and acknowledge the fact that dank bud at the point of production is not the same product that people are getting at the point of consumption. Mm-hmm. That's a hard pill to swallow for some people, no pun intended. But the reality is the industry is growing and changing. Our collective intelligence about the plant is improving all the time. I'm blown away by the number of studies that the Boveda Innovation Center has done with outside labs. Every single cultivar from every single producer has a different fingerprint in terms of the picture of what the terpene profile is, what the other cannabinoid profile is, what the overall water dynamics are. I mean, these are unique data points that are new to this industry. I mean, it's an exciting place to be if you're into science and if you really are curious about what's it going to be like in the future. The standardization of an industry around quality and reliability, man, this is an exciting place to be.
If I can say one thing to any LPs listening, if you don't know what water activity is or it's not on your radar, I would get it on your radar, learn about it, and start testing for water activity. You can buy a handheld device for, a couple $1,000s. They have nicer tabletop ones that are a little bit more expensive, but it's coming. The way of testing moisture inside of cannabis will be water activity. It already is in some states and countries, and I just can't stress that enough. If you don't know the water activity, you should.
And we can come and help our guys with that, and we can also provide a presentation about more about what we talked about today to them to get them started thinking about this in the right way that they need to start thinking about it for their business and their brand.
Yeah,
exactly.
One thing that I kind of draw the analogy is measuring water activity versus measuring the moisture content, total moisture content. When you're measuring the moisture content, it's almost like you're measuring to the nearest centimeter. When you're measuring the water activity, you're down to the nearest millimeter, right? So you're dialing it in, you're getting more focus, and that focus is going to shed the light on how safe it is, when you're going to degrade, on how fast it's going to evaporate, or if that terpene shield is put in place.
And again, in my conversation with this LP this morning, he shared with me that he's heard someone talk about water activity 3 times. It was his 4th time this week. Someone's talked to him about water activity.
That's good.
But he was unfamiliar with what water activity was. So anyone listening, I don't think I went through this before, but the easiest analogy of water activity versus moisture content is the active water and the bound water. So the active water is going to be that free flowing water that either comes into the product or leaves it. That bound water is generally going to stay there unless you force it out with heat or pressure or something along those lines. So if you think about it as a sponge, water activity is the active water in moisture content. And if you think about a sponge, if you soak a sponge in water and squeeze it, all that water that drains out of the sponge is the active water. That's what you're measuring, that active water that's going to be either relieving or removed from the product or coming into it. And then obviously that sponge is going to have moisture still attached to it. That's the bound water.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, Scott. That's great. I mean, maybe a quick extension to the conversation flow at this point would be, once a cultivator, standard, micro, home grow, or otherwise, cures their cannabis down to the appropriate levels that the growers deem under their program that they're doing, the Boveda then gets inserted from a storage perspective until it's ready to be either processed into something else, pre-rolls, end up at another LP for packaging, etc. What about the finished packaging side of things? LPs using Boveda within 3.5 gram jars, 7 gram jars, pre-rolled, etc. A lot of our guys use it in the final packaging, and I know it's the same concepts repeated again and all the same benefits, but for those that don't know, it's a major trend that we're starting to see and have been involved with, and an important part, more to Drew's point and what we were talking about with how long it might take for somebody to actually put that product into their hands and bring it home and actually enjoy it. So the Boveda experience can go beyond storage at a cultivation facility or storage facility or sitting on a shelf through to into your hands in the final packaging that you're getting.
Yeah, great point. And it's a common mistake is thinking that my cannabis, after I've cured it and stored it, is at perfect condition. I'm going to package it up into this plastic container or a soft side bag, and it's going to be perfect. I'm putting it in perfect. It's going to stay perfect. Well, that's not the case. A lot of the packaging used by LPs is not airtight. So you're having a pretty high transmission of water vapor through the packaging that's being used. And just it becomes an environment. I mean, there's nothing protecting the trichomes. So that product can off-gas moisture inside of the packaging. As you alluded to, a lot of times it sits on the shelf, or someone buys an ounce and they open it and, smoke a gram or two and then reseal it up, and it lasts them for, a month or 2 months. Well, every time they open that container, it's being exposed to the outside air. So, we always tell cultivators and brands and LPs that you put all this time, blood, sweat, and tears into growing the product. You've dried it, cured it, blah, blah, blah. It's perfect, but you're willing to just throw it all away and forget about it when you launch it or send it off to market, which is why, the smaller sizes of Boveda are imperative to your operation.
For sure, and we have GrowHaus has a pretty compelling and active retail dispensary offering of products we work with, Boveda being one of them on the retail dispensary brick and mortar stores. So always opportunities for end consumers if they're purchasing cannabis at a store or online to pick up their own supply of Boveda for their own personal home use, so that they can manage, store, curate their collection of cannabis products they like and preserve them for long periods of time, and have that quality be there. It's just another great audience for all the benefits that Boveda brings. So.
Nope, that's exactly right. And, as we touched on before, in 7 days, 40% of those terpenes were gone from the product. And this is exactly why you would want to store with Boveda for your final package product going out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really any kind of storage and obviously the retail packaging, but any kind of storage. I mean, after you're done with the initial drying and whatever you consider to be a cure, that there's an argument that a lot of people are so enthusiastic about getting to market. There's not a lot of cannabis in the world that's getting cured per se, stored over time with managed temperature, humidity control, and the various ways people can manipulate that in order to create a cured finished product. I mean, there's a whole science behind that. And frankly, if you're curing for 2 weeks, it's not really curing, it's just extended drying. If you're curing for 3 to 6 months, you're having a conversation about curing.
Yeah, there's a great analogy that the wine industry kind of plays on, and especially red wines, where wherever that vineyard is, right, and you're tasting that red wine as it's aging, right before they bottle it, they add sulfites to it, and the sulfite is going to lock in that flavor from the time it's bottled and corked to the time that consumer gets it. Well, as soon as you open that bottle, the red wine starts to breathe, right? So you can kind of think about, from the cultivator and LP perspective, you grow, you harvest, and then you cure it. And as soon as you package, you want to lock that in. You want to lock that all the way to the consumer gets it. So I kind of consider like humidity control kind of in that same sulfite analogy, if you would.
Yeah, good point.
It's a great
point.
I have one last story, and it is exactly the same thing as the wine story, but on the cigar side. And it's actually a story that is true to us. And it was our first OEM or packaged with Boveda customer on the tobacco side back in, was that 2000 or 2001? Fuente Cigars, extremely well-known, high-end brand in the tobacco industry. My favorite cigars, a lot of people's favorite cigars around the office.
Fuente Friday.
Yep, it's Fuente Friday. There we go. But so Carlos Fuente, the issue that he was having is they're in the DR, so the tobacco's growing there. They make the cigars there. Obviously, he's experiencing and consuming the cigars in that environment. Well, the humidity in the Dominican Republic is perfect for tobacco or premium cigars. So he's having out of this park, experiences with these cigars that he's creating. Well, the issue or the problem that he wanted to solve is he wanted his consumers to experience that cigar as if they were in the DR on his farm experiencing it, and determine that the only way to do that is to have it stored with Boveda, so it's at the proper humidity control or the proper humidity level, and that's controlled throughout the process. from when they grow the tobacco to roll it. It sits and it dries, it ages, then it gets packaged in boxes, and then it gets, shipped in an airplane or a boat from the Dominican over to the United States. Then it sits in a retail shop for, a couple weeks, and then someone brings it home and consumes it. Well, he wanted to create that perfect environment all the way throughout the process, and they started packaging with Boveda. And the cool thing that happened was we were back ordered. We were small and couldn't fulfill all the orders. So he decided, you know what? I'm not going to wait for more Boveda product. I'm just going to ship out a round of boxes without Boveda in it, and people will be fine. My cigars are flying off the shelf. No one's going to even care. Well, that was the opposite of what happened. Retailers were denying the boxes, saying, no, we want the boxes that have Boveda in it. Our consumers don't want these cigars that are not protected. And that was that kind of aha moment for him, like, holy cow, this is actually working, building value and doing something for my brand.
Saving the brand.
We want to do the same thing in the cannabis space.
Mm-hmm. It's good. That's a great story, and that's a good way to relate. And the amount of time we spend in the retail dispensary side with our offering too, we could start suggesting that to retail dispensaries too. They should really consider carrying more products that have Boveda built into it on the shelf for a better experience for their customers. It's the same analogy for a retail dispensary on the cannabis side.
Exact same. Yep.
Yeah. Fuente Friday. Why can't we
Doesn't
be
that
there
sound
with you
yummy?
guys? It does. It's probably our favorite cigar too, John and I. Fuentes.
So I don't know, guys. I don't know if we've covered all the ground, enough ground, more ground.
Let's do this again.
Okay. Next October 30th or before then?
No, we can do it more than once a year. I mean, you guys are pretty tolerable. Let's do it more often. Let's go. Let's find out where the interest is in the marketplace. Let's answer the questions people have. Let's be the support that we want to be to the whole industry at large. Let's really find a way to deliver the kind of education and the kind of support that people need to be successful in this cannabis industry.
Yeah, we really can't, we can't say enough how thankful we are for you guys helping educate the market. That's what we want to do. It's about education. It's not about voodoo and witchcraft. It's about science and facts and expanding the industry, helping our growers, helping our clients. So, yeah.
Well, you started this by saying it was a privilege to work with us, and I want to echo that back to you. And on behalf of everybody at Boveda, there's people like you guys that have your heart and your head in the right place, and you're out there serving people in the markets that you serve. You're doing such a good job, and it's an absolute privilege for us to do business with you. And you know us, we'll show up wherever, anytime, anywhere. Yeah. You want to have these conversations, we're happy to engage and give you whatever support we can.
Yeah, we know that, guys, and likewise, right back at you. And first and foremost, again, thanks for your time today. I know you guys are busy. I know you're coming off another session here, and we just really appreciate your time. And this was great. I think our audience is going to love this. I think we're going to be able to transmit a lot of information, education out, and lead to some more follow-up conversations with people that want to learn more, and we're going to tell them about it. So
that's awesome. Yeah, appreciate it, John and George. And
thanks, guys.
And the 2H media team for setting it up. And
Ramsey.
Yeah.
Ramsey.
I want to leave this with one teaser here, guys. R&D guys, scientists over here, we're not just formulating, we're innovating. And every time we innovate, we're looking at how we can take our Boveda formula and put it into a different package to help our customers. And so we've got some unique things that we're going to be launching here pretty soon that I can't really divulge right now, but we are growing with our customers and really cool things coming out.
Hey, Drew, that sounds like when we're going to get together next time is to talk about these next innovations.
It won't be long then.
Hopefully we can do it in person too, like Q1 of 2021 in person.
You can come up. You just have to quarantine for 2 weeks in Canada. I mean, can you handle that?
I don't mind staying. I don't mind staying.
John might.
As long as we're in separate rooms.